What up, guys? Today we have a question from a self-proclaimed Spazzy white belt who's curious about the difference between someone who's a master with the technique versus someone using the same technique but as a novice. So it's interesting. He says, Chewy, the highest percentage submissions in upper level competitions are almost always the most basic submissions, things like arm bars, kimuras, triangles, rear naked chokes. Can you explain what the difference is between a master and a novice using the same technique? I'm failing to understand how upper level belts get caught in the most basic submissions. Shouldn't their defenses be strong enough that they don't fall for these things at the highest level? Thanks in advance, signed, Spazzy white belt. And so this is an interesting question. As someone who uses very basic level jiu-jitsu at a fairly high level, this is something that connects with me and something that I think is fun, and I could probably write a whole book about it or do several of these videos, but we're gonna focus on a couple ideas to chew on today. The first thing is that you have to think about the fact that it's not just the techniques, right? It's the person wielding those techniques. I think it's best explained through the idea of invisible jiu-jitsu. Rickson Gracie talks about this in his book. I'll read the idea off to you real fast. He says, the invisible aspects of jiu-jitsu, like the sense of touch, weight, momentum, and physical connection to your opponent, are very difficult to teach. This is not rational, intellectual knowledge that one can learn from a lecture or a book, only thousands of hours of training. So this idea, right, of sense of touch, weight, momentum, physical connection, you start to get this sixth sense about jiu-jitsu. You develop this hypersensitivity as you train, because as you train jiu-jitsu, all these adaptations happen in your body, right? Your brain circuitry is changing. Your muscles are changing, right? Certain muscles are strengthening. You develop certain weird sort of adaptations in your body to facilitate better jiu-jitsu. Your body literally morphs around the training as you do it. And so what ends up happening is it's like a musician or say a craftsman. You give a master musician an instrument and they can make you beautiful music. You give a master craftsman his tools and they can make amazing works, right? They could give me the same tools or you the same tools and we may not be able to make anything at all or our music would suck, right? There's the difference. It's not the techniques, it's not the tools, it's the person wielding them, right? And so you got to think the person at the highest level, right? The person that's wielding these tools, they're so good, right? And they don't just think jiu-jitsu, they feel it. This is something, again, just like the invisible jiu-jitsu idea. You can talk about it, we can explain it to you, and you can nod your head yes, but it's so hard to understand until you feel it. And when you feel it and you have that hypersensitivity to the slightest adjustments of technique, to the slightest movements of your partner's body or your opponent's body, then you get it, right? And so that's one thing. As you train jiu-jitsu for longer and longer, you adapt to jiu-jitsu, and therefore your capacity to effectively execute techniques goes way up. Another idea, and again, we could talk about tons of these, but I'm trying to make this video nice and short and concise. Another idea is that at the same time, when you take someone who's attempted to master a technique, again, you're not gonna master everything in jiu-jitsu. You're typically gonna master a handful of things that become your go-tos, right? Even the great Rickson Gracie, the guy that I think about using basic jiu-jitsu at the highest level, even he said that, right? You're only gonna master a handful of techniques, everything else you'll kind of know. So when you start to try to master something in jiu-jitsu, what ends up happening is you go through this trial and error process. It works for a while, your partners defend it, then you have to figure out new ways of setting it up and executing it, and then they defend that, and you go through this trial and error where you'll try it over and over again, it fails, and then you make a slight adjustment and boom, it starts working again. And you do this for years, right? I mean, I go back to positions all the time that are fairly basic that I know that I'm effective with, and I always find something new when I give them a little bit of focus for a month or so. Even my half guard, we just finished up a half guard focused phase of our training for about 3 weeks, and I found a couple new techniques that I'm gonna be working into the system because again, just it was always there, but I never noticed it. So again, those are two ideas for you. One is that the person using the techniques, they change. And then as they continue to try to master these techniques, the way they execute them changes. And eventually, I've mentioned this before on the channel about like comparing it to musicians. Eventually you become just jiu-jitsu, right? You start basically stringing things together. It's like talking to a musician who, they're not telling you exactly that they're going from this chord to that chord. They're just putting it together because it feels right. And as you start to execute techniques that you've been doing for, decades or whatever it might be, spent thousands of hours doing them, you all of a sudden start to string them together without even thought. It just happens. So anyway, that's the idea to chew on. Spazzy white belt. Hopefully that answers your question or at least gives you something to think about, and I'll talk to you guys next time.